Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Claudia Monticelli, the host of this podcast, Let's Talk Soul. Over the years, after having interviewed so many people on so many different topics, I realized that what interested my audience wasn't really the individual topics per se, but was how it impacted them, how it touched their soul. So I'll invite you all to lay back, put your feet up, and if you like what you hear, leave a review, 5-star review. I'd appreciate that. So just enjoy your listening. Now, as I said, and I often say, I interview many people who are after my own heart, men and women who do similar things to me. But as you can see from the interviews, there's always a different perspective. There's always a very unique take. And today I'm with Jennifer Moore. Jennifer, say hello to our audience.
Hey there, you guys. So good to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. And Jennifer is talking to us from Maine in the United States. Now, there are a number of things that I can tell you about her. Obviously, she will speak for herself, but just let me start by saying, mentioning her book. Jennifer is the author of an Amazon, show it to us, bestseller called Empathic Mastery. Now, it's one of EFT International's, and you can tell us what EFT is, one of EFT International's 122 master trainers and a mentor and healer for other highly sensitive, empathic women. Has been intuitive from the get-go. We'll start with her experience talking about her. And I won't say anything else, so first tell us about this EFT International.
Okay, so EFT International. EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques, and it is a technique that is sort of like in a form of emotional acupuncture, but without the needles. It's also sometimes known as tapping. Although tapping is more of the broad term,
yes,
and EFT is more of a clinical application of it.
So
using it,
they are specific points that are touched. Is that right?
Yes, very specific points that are touched, and EFT when used by an accredited certified practitioner who's really been trained can be used to address trauma, can be used to address really like places where we have been stuck for a very, very long time.
Very interesting.
Really powerful. I've worked as a psychic, intuitive, and a healer for most of my adult life. I've been sort of in the healing realms for over 4 decades.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I have never ever found a more effective tool than EFT.
Well,
it has been truly life-changing for me, and that is why I do what I do now.
But when you say I've never ever found, I will not ask you your age, of course not, but I would like to know how many years you have been practicing, and therefore how many things you may know, and you've chosen this.
So as I said, I've spent, so I am at the tail. Let's just say I'm at the very, very tail end of the baby boomers and the beginning of the Gen Xers. And so I've been on the planet for a while, and I've been doing these things for a while.
Yeah.
And my first encounters or forays into the intuitive world was like literally 40 years ago.
Okay.
And my journey around the healing arts and the healing work started more like 30 years ago. But I've been involved with and working with EFT as a professional for nearly 10 years. So, I mean, I have done breath work, I have done Reiki, I have done a lot of work in shamanic healing and energy healing. And what I absolutely love about EFT is that it is incredibly versatile. It is incredibly applicable to pretty much anything that is going on. And it also can be done by somebody for themselves. You don't have to rely on a professional to do it.
Interesting. This is probably the most interesting thing about it, really.
Yeah.
Although other people, people who swear by massage and certain types of massage can do it on on themselves. Acupuncture can be done on themselves.
Yeah.
Now, let's start at the beginning, okay?
Let's start at the beginning.
All right. When did you start this stuff? Come on, go back in time.
So going way back in time, I was always a very, very sensitive, intuitive, creative, magical child with a sense of wonder and a sense that the world was more than was dreamt of, certainly in my white picket fence, like a church on every single street corner,
Right.
and a bank on the other street corner
Right.
philosophy of my hometown. And
Where was your hometown?
I grew up in a town just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. Like literally like white picket fences, white congregational churches,
White.
white. Yeah. As a matter of fact, interestingly, there is a woman whose name is Debbie Irving who wrote a book called, I believe it is, I believe it is actually called Growing Up White.
Yeah.
She grew up in the same town I grew up in. And I knew she did when she described the mural in the library. And I was like, oh my God, do other towns in New England have the same mural? It's like, no, she grew up in your hometown.
When we were, chatting, I'm saying this for the benefit of our listeners, when we were chatting before we pressed record, I asked her, what's a nice girl like you doing in a place like Maine? And I myself grew up in the greater New York city area. And so for me, going home would be to see all the colors of the rainbow and listen to that music in all those different languages, quite different from Connecticut upwards,
Yes.
I know what that means. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and interestingly, even the difference between Massachusetts and Maine is Maine is a very it is a much whiter population.
Yes, I know it gets whiter as you go up.
It gets whiter as you go up. The thing I absolutely love about Maine is a really interesting place because there are very liberal people in Maine, and then there are also some very conservative people in Maine. Yeah. And for the most part, we get along pretty well.
Oh, that's a surprise.
We kind of have a live and let live attitude here.
Yeah.
And we also, one of the things I love about Maine is that we have the oldest organic farmers and gardeners association in the entire country.
Yeah.
Homesteading and honoring the land and respecting the land is a really big part of there's a lot of value for the land here.
It begs the question, and I don't generally touch on politics directly. Maine is a conservative or liberal general in
we are a purple state. We are a purple state.
Okay,
we are a state where
would mean
purple, meaning that we are mixed. We have the bottom half of our state is extremely blue and very very progressive, which is where I am. And then the northern part of the state is a lot more red and a lot more conservative, but and running along the coast though is generally pretty liberal and progressive.
I know, but in numbers, who is in the Senate and who's in the House of Representatives? What color are they?
To be completely honest, at this point in time, I believe we are mostly Democrats. I mean, mostly Democrats, and we have a Democratic governor. We did have a,
I see.
We
so
did have a
liberal.
Yeah, we're pretty liberal
in the government.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
In the government, we're liberal.
Now that I got you to speak about that, so go on. If you could remember, you had you mentioned to me that you had to deal with skeptics as you grew up.
I did. So I grew up, not only did I have to deal with skeptics, I grew up in an atheist household.
Oh,
and so
that's
I was
interesting.
Yeah. I was born in a family that my mother was a recovering Catholic who had left the church and kind of had an axe on her shoulder. She had a chip on her shoulder and an axe to grind. That's what I meant.
Mixed metaphors there.
Yeah, mixed metaphors there. Yeah. My mother definitely had a chip on her shoulder and an axe to grind when it came to the church, and she left the church before I was born.
Yeah.
My father was born in a family of sort of Southern transplants who had come up to New England.
Interesting.
So they were, my dad's family was from the Deep South, but they had migrated and they were intellectuals. My grandfather was a psychiatrist and a writer. My grandmother was an artist.
May I ask, are black or white?
white.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. More on the landowning side of things.
I
And
see.
so, yeah, I definitely have ancestors who and I come from a really interesting combination because on one side, on my mom's side, I come from very poor
Ah,
Irish Catholic fishing stock.
right.
And on the other side, I come from landowning Southern people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a very interesting thing to know that I have, I've got in my ancestry, and I'm sure that within my ancestry, I have other kinds of heritage within me. I know I've got some Native
Uh-huh.
American ancestry. My genotype, at least according to what I have, I'm pretty much like 83 or something like 80. Actually, I think I'm personally about 80% Celt.
Yeah,
So I'm
but
very much
still
from the
it's
British
white.
Isles.
It is
It's
white no
white,
matter how
white,
you
white,
cut
white.
it.
No matter how you cut it. I jokingly say, especially once I got my genome, I would jokingly say, I am Whitey McWhiterson. Like my gene, my genetic expression or what we see in the gene pool is definitely they poured bleach in it. So
Yeah, I can
yeah.
get that. I
And I
get that.
will say, when I moved to Maine, it was pretty shocking to be in a place that
Can
did
I
not
ask
have the diversity that I was
what
used to.
what brought you to Maine?
The opportunity to tattoo.
Oh,
I was living, yeah,
what do you mean?
I ran a tattoo studio and co-owned a tattoo studio for nearly 20 years.
I see the tattoos as you
Yes,
move.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
As I move, so anyway, I tattooing was illegal in Massachusetts at the
Oh,
time,
ooh.
and it had been illegal since the early 60s
Ooh,
for various
you're
political
a
reasons.
woman who breaks all the rules.
Oh, I
Ooh, you're a
definitely
sinner,
do.
a white
Oh,
sinner.
yeah, sinner is not exactly. I mean, well, actually, I mean, I could go into a whole thing about what I actually believe sin is
Yeah.
because, because I also spent time in seminary
Oh my
getting a
goodness.
master's degree in
Oh my
psychology
oh
and
my goodness.
religion.
Wait, wait, wait.
Yeah.
Say that
Yeah.
again slowly and tell us exactly what seminary is.
Okay, so seminary is the word for people who decide they want to become ministers.
Okay.
And it is
Of
basically
a particular denomination of a particular
I was
religion.
I was pursuing a master's degree originally, a master's in divinity, which I then
Okay.
changed over to a master's in psychology and religion.
I see.
But I was going to become a Unitarian Universalist minister
Ah,
because with my atheist family that
yes.
I was talking about,
Yeah.
with both sides being atheist, um, that I basically about around the age of 9 or 10 years old, I was like, I wanted to go to church because
Yeah.
everybody in my town
I know.
was going to church. And it
Yes.
was
Yes.
really hard
Yeah.
being one of the few kids in
Yes.
the
Yes.
late 60s,
Yes.
early
Yeah.
70s who did not fit into that
Yeah.
box.
There's I'll stop you just a second to
Yeah.
give you an outside view because as you know, I live in Italy. I go back and forth. I
Mm-hmm.
still have family
Mm-hmm.
there. My family's here. Now, at one point, a friend of mine who was he worked in industry in Italy who created fabrics, and it was in the area outside in the northern part of Florence and Tuscany, and they were known for all of their fabrics. They had the onslaught of Chinese, and he just went out of business. He applied for many different things, and one of the opportunities that he had was moving to Texas. And he kept in touch, and he said, Claudia, I don't know what to do for a social life. He said, I can't, because
Mm-hmm.
his family was here, his wife, his children were still in Italy. And he said, I don't like going to bars. I don't like this. He said, I found that church offered the social encounters that I was looking for. And he
Yeah.
said, in its, it goes against the grain of how I think. But, I do have to say, this is one occasion, but I've heard it over and over and over that they have the market cornered on the social aspect
They
of spirituality. Let's put it that way.
Well, and especially, I mean, having gone to seminary and being in the world of watching churches, I will say that I think that the more conservative churches actually have the sort of the social skills
Yeah.
market, and the
Yes.
understanding of
Yes.
what's necessary
Yes.
even better than the liberal churches
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like even the whole thing of just like when somebody is new coming into a church,
Yeah.
the welcoming, like
Yes.
having people who go towards somebody as opposed to people standing in their coffee clutches. I
Yeah.
mean, I grew up in very, in the sort of staid New England Protestant environment where, it's like if they didn't know you, they did not bother to come over and welcome you.
Right, right.
And I think that, but especially as you were saying, your friend down in Texas,
Yeah.
it's like the churches definitely know how to make people feel welcome.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you going to get
Yeah.
to church next
Yeah.
week?
Yeah.
Come for a ride. I personally, wanted, as a child was like, please take me to church.
Right.
And appreciated it, but have since, as an adult, my church is nature. My
Yeah.
church is community and connection with
Okay.
other people. My
Yeah.
church is this earth, really. And so I'm not an active churchgoer at this point in time, because I really believe that the divine has many, 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 many different
Obviously,
expressions.
yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to, I mean, there's so much to talk about.
There
And
are
when we
so
talk,
many
there's
things
just
we
so
can
many
talk about. Yeah. And I can tell just the way you and I are talking that you and I have a similar way of just being like, oh my goodness, look at this cool thing.
I know.
Yeah.
But we have, there's an overlap in many of the things that we both do. But I find that it would be a good time now to discuss the different distinctions between the empath, because your book is empathic mastery,
mastery. Yep.
The empath, psychic, which many people think that that's just a broad umbrella term, and the intuitive and medium. Those 4 different things. What's the difference? And can someone be all of them?
Oh, yes. So yeah, in my experience, people absolutely can be all of them. And so first off, I'm just going to start by explaining the definition from my perspective of what an empath is. And I will say that the word empath is originally a science fiction term. It's not a clinical term.
Interesting.
And but it's becoming very popular in sort of common parlance. It's almost like empath is the new black these days, in the sense that it's very, very common, and a lot of people identify as empaths. So different people are going to have slightly different definitions of it. So I'm going to give you mine.
Okay.
My definition of empath is a person or creature, because it can be even a dog, a cat, some kind of other, but a living being who is picking up on the thoughts, the feelings, the energy, the sensations, the pain, the struggles from the world around them. Now, this information, or this openness, this capacity to pick this up, this is a trait that nearly anybody who sort of has the capacity for extrasensory perception is going to be picking up on to some extent or another. What makes somebody specifically an empath is that empaths process the information that is coming to them and experience it as if it is their own.
Okay.
And so where an intuitive is going to get more of a gut sense or a gut feeling.
Wait. So an empath. Give me an example. Beautiful cat there. Give me an example of.
This is Neo.
Neo. I like
Neo
that.
as a name after the after the Matrix. Yes.
All right. An empath. Can you give me an example of something that an empath does? What has how can I put it? Well, if you understand where I'm going with it, give me an example of what an empath does, and the intuitive. What would an intuitive do in XYZ situation, and what the empath would do?
Well, so I think I understand what you're saying. So sort of an example of how it would express itself with an empath versus an intuitive.
Right. Someone comes to you, a client comes to you. And what would
well, so actually I'd love to go back before that, even in terms of not even talking about clients, because the thing is that often as an empath, the challenge that an empath could wake up one morning, everything in their life is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong.
Right.
They wake up with this sense of foreboding. They
Ah,
wake up with like a sour stomach. They wake
right,
up feeling really distressed and worried and concerned. And they're like, what is going on?
right.
And maybe it is like a day or two later, all hell breaks loose somewhere else on
Yeah,
the planet.
yeah,
Like, the Twin Towers blow, a plane drives into the Twin Towers.
yeah.
Or it could be that, that they 2 hours, they wake up and then 2, 3 hours later, they go into work and discover that their boss their boss's parent just had a sudden heart attack or
All
something.
right.
And so the thing about being an empath, unlike, when somebody's got intuition, psychic ability, mediumship, all of these things, usually the thing about those people is that they know that information is coming in from the outside.
Yeah.
And so as a result, they can then take that ability and will often do things like put up their shingle and become a tarot reader or an astrologer or just a general kind of psychic or
Wait,
a
wait, wait, wait.
healer.
I lost a little link there. So you're saying that the empaths, they have a foreboding, correct?
They might have a foreboding. They might have a headache. They
Okay.
might have a stomach ache.
Okay.
They might be feeling just namelessly agitated,
Okay.
where they're just feeling like out of sorts. And one of the things that often happens for empaths is that, and I will say that in the years that I've been working with highly sensitive empathic people and working with people who identify as empaths, is that one of the common things that almost every single person I've ever spoken to was told, as even as a small child, was you're being too sensitive.
Yeah.
You're overreacting.
Yes.
You're too emotional. You are taking it too seriously. Stop worrying about it.
Lighten
Just
up.
let it go. Lighten up.
Yeah.
Lighten up. And so, what I have seen that happens with empaths is because there is such a message that comes at them over and over. Nothing's wrong here. What are you talking about? And especially empaths growing up in dysfunctional family systems where where they are the designated emoter.
Right.
Because there's a lot of denial and within the family system, the empath is often being told
Targeted.
that's not real. You're
Yeah.
not feeling anything. You're crazy.
Right.
You're the one who's making this shit up. You're the one who's overreacting. And so, where with the empath, the challenge is often that sense, that extra sensory awareness, that ability to pick up on the unspoken, the unseen, can be very confusing because we're feeling it, we're thinking it, we're sensing it in our bodies, but we may have been told or conditioned and gaslit for such a long time that we just imagine that we're just having a hard day, or that or that we really are just really overly emotional and overly
and we're
sensitive.
just don't know what we're talking about. Right.
Don't know what we're talking about.
Okay.
And so the challenge for that is that when an empath is in that state of not recognizing that that's what they are and thinking they're just too sensitive,
right,
it really can be debilitating.
Yes.
In terms of life and in terms of a career.
Now, you're
and in
bringing
terms of
me
anything else
to another topic, but I will hold off of that because the way you describe empaths begs the question, well, they have to take care of themselves, right? So we'll do that.
Yes.
We'll do that later.
Yeah, let's definitely talk about that. Yeah.
But now let's contrast that with intuitives first, and then psychics and channelers, mediums.
Mediums, yeah, absolutely. So, and what I will say is, the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the person who gives them. Take what you like and leave the rest. This is coming from my personal experience and my journey. My coming up on pushing up on 6 decades of around the sun.
Yeah.
So in my experience, intuition or the intuitive is often somebody who is receiving information, but and feeling it. Usually my sense is intuitive is usually more of a gut sense. It's more of an embodied sense. And it's often more of a knowing, like where there's just kind of like a felt knowing of what is.
Okay.
Whereas in my experience, somebody with psychic ability is generally picking up information more in the sort of sort of mental realm. And I would say that, you've got what are called the clairs, which are
Right.
the different sort of sensory awarenesses. You've
Mm-hmm.
got the clairvoyance, which is the seeing,
Mm-hmm.
clairaudience, hearing, clairsentience, which is more of the feeling or the
Mm-hmm.
sensing things coming through, claircognizance, which is the knowing.
Mm-hmm.
I think often clairvoyant, clairaudient, and claircognizance is what people identify with, or imagine for psychic, whereas like clairsentience would be more likely the intuitive, that
Mm-hmm.
felt sense of things. But the thing that makes both the psychic and the intuitive different than the empath is that when information is coming in, they understand that it is coming in and it is not already being generated
Okay.
from.
Okay.
And so the information may be the exact same information that the empath is getting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that the intuitive and the psychic
Yeah.
are picking that information up and understanding it's coming from the outside.
Okay.
Now, the best explanation I've ever heard to distinguish between what's the difference between a medium and a psychic
Mm-hmm.
is that the psychic is picking up information from the living world, the
Yeah.
medium is picking up information from the other side.
Okay.
And so the medium is the one who's picking up information from other dimensions, from the spirit realm,
Right.
and has the ability to be communicating with the seen, with the
Mm-hmm.
unseen worlds.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to insert myself here because before I talk about that guarding and taking care of yourself, I want to say something that I feel is important here. You mention and you describe these different figures as something happening to them, or from either from within or from above or without. But there's a lot to be said that when you do your work, you just can't sit here and have things happening to you. You're not going to be able to do your food shopping, for crying out loud.
Right.
There is something, well, people like myself and surely yourself, I get information when I want it. I go and get information, what I need when I need it. I just block out, and maybe that's part of self-care, but I'm not influenced by the negative energy unless I'm not paying attention and all of a sudden I break my leg,
Yeah.
So then those are signs. What about this? I mean, do you have anything to say about that, about the how can I say, the percentage of a person in tune with what is happening to them, or the percentage of them being able to go out and get things that they need to know?
So, I mean, that in many ways is really what the whole idea of empathic mastery is about, is going from being in the position where you are so bombarded by information that you don't even know what end is up, to being able to make the decision as to what you are experiencing, when and what you are taking on.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that I have found that as the world has been sort of heating up over the last, especially, of the last 3 years.
What do you mean by heating up?
Heating up, well, literally, in terms of just, what we're going through with climate change and some of the, climate change. And I mean, all the fires that have been burning across the planet. But also, the political climates have been heating up in terms of there's more and more divisiveness. There's more and more tension between one side and the other.
So you're saying that heating up fires and all of that would be a negative?
I'm not sure I would say it is a negative thing, but I would say, like, just in the same way that giving birth, whether you think it's a positive or negative thing, it's not easy. It's like pushing a baby out is painful and is messy and is intense. And so what I would say is, and then of course with the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement here in the United States, and the Me Too movement, all kinds of things. And I personally believe that this is like isms and trauma, that we have been a can of isms and trauma that we have been kicking down the road for thousands of years, that is coming home to roost, and that is inviting us to look at it.
Yeah.
when things got really intense back in early 2020, when
Mm-hmm.
COVID was really starting to just ramp
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
I was experiencing moments where, despite all of the work that I have done to be really deliberate and to be really
Mm-hmm.
mindful of what comes in and what does not come
Yeah.
in, the intensity of the emotional climate
Mm-hmm.
had gotten so in like so big
Mm-hmm.
that I really found myself kind of like getting it was sort of like it was like a tsunami just kind of hit me.
Mm-hmm.
I was used to being where I was
Yeah.
and had sort of put
Mm.
myself in a position
Interesting.
where I was kind of safe
Interesting.
and curated,
Mm-hmm.
and yet I suddenly was like I needed to recalibrate
Yeah. Yeah.
everything so that
Mm-hmm.
I was not getting knocked over.
Interesting. It's
Yeah.
interesting how the different reactions are. In my case, I was quite thankful for such a change
Mm-hmm.
because it made me necessarily do things differently. And so I developed different things. And but in by no means that I feel that it was negative. Obviously, I was not ill. I was not sick. I didn't,
Well, and my dad died from it.
ah,
So he was he was within the first 10,000 people who died from it.
that's
So
terrible.
my perspective of
How
it
old
was
was he?
he was in his 80s and
Mm-hmm.
he was not, and I mean, we had lost him to dementia quite a
Uh-huh.
while
Uh-huh.
before.
I
So
see.
in his particular case, it was really kind of a weird blessing
Yeah.
because,
Yeah, I guess.
his body was not necessarily, but what made it so hard was like we were not able to
Able to
grieve.
see him.
We
Yeah.
were not able to see him.
Of
We couldn't
course.
be by
Of
his
course.
bedside as he
Of
died.
course.
We couldn't even do a funeral for him because it
Right.
was really at the very early stages of it. But
Yeah.
it really gave me a different perspective.
Sure.
I will say I agree with you completely in terms of I was so grateful for the boundaries that
Yeah.
COVID allowed people to set
Yeah.
for the restructuring of our
Mm-hmm,
lives.
mm-hmm.
I was already living very much a life very similar to what I live now,
Yeah.
in that I was already working virtually and doing and not and pretty much doing things on my own terms. And so from that standpoint, there were so many gifts that I
Yeah.
really do believe
Well,
the
this
pandemic brought.
actually will lead into this last point that I wanted to
Yeah.
discuss is the self-care aspect and the
Self-care.
boundaries. All
Exactly.
right. And you mentioned the self-care for empaths because I deduce from that you believe empaths get a bad rap compared to the others because they live it on their skin. Am I right in
I mean, I think that it depends on who you're talking to and
yeah.
where you're talking, but I think that empaths get a bad rap in a couple different ways. I think one,
Mm-hmm.
that empaths within family
Mm-hmm.
systems will get a bad rap when the family doesn't want to deal with their feelings and
Of
the empath is
course.
the person who's feeling their
Right.
feelings.
Right.
And then I do think that also that you've got places where empaths kind of get like lumped into the victim
Yeah.
category or into the, oh, poor widow empath who
Right.
can't
Right.
really help themselves.
Right.
And my mission is to say you can help
Mm-hmm,
yourself.
mm-hmm.
One of the first steps is ironically accepting or embracing the identity and being like, okay, I am an empath.
Right.
I am picking up things in a different way than some people are.
Yeah.
And as a result, I need to take care of myself.
Okay.
And so going back to self-care, in my personal experience, the very first place where self-care starts is with being mindful of what we're exposing ourselves to
Mm-hmm.
and curating our exposure, like choosing what we engage with. Now, in some cases, there are things that we are just, put into a position where we absolutely have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is. And I guess I would say, do believe that we always have a choice
Of
about
course.
whether we're going to do something
Of
or
course.
not,
Of
unless
course.
somebody's, I mean, worst case scenario, somebody's holding a gun to your
Of
head, you
course.
still get to
Yeah.
choose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you
Sure.
still get to choose. Is
Yeah.
like, are you going to
Yeah.
live or die?
Yeah.
But I do think that the thing about choice is that sometimes the choices are less tenable. Like
Okay.
sometimes the
You have
consequences
a
of those
gun at
choices,
your head.
yeah,
Where's the choice there?
the choice is either to live or to die.
Well, if you choose to live and they pull the trigger,
Right.
there is still the choice to make it alive out of that. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, I suppose, like, I guess what I'm saying is from my perspective, when it comes to, and the point of this is to say that that some of us have, I think, more resources and more freedom and more space to decide and to curate than some other people. But even within that, it's like we get to decide, what are we going to look at? What are we scrolling on our phone? What kind of news are we watching or not watching? What kind of media are we exposing ourselves to?
You know,
whose phone calls are we answering or taking?
Sure. And one thing, because I always mail out a questionnaire, and one of the things that I was so surprised when we talk about self-care for the empaths, you talk about sugar, and I thought, oh, yes, my God, my red licorice, I can't do that anymore. What's the story?
Well, you can.
All right, now why is
it's just about consequences
to avoid?
Okay, so in my experience, sugar is for one thing, sugar really destabilizes the system. Sugar destabilizes our, it sets us off into this kind of cascade of like up and down. And it also deeply affects our gut biome. It deeply affects what is growing in our gut, the healthy flora versus the unhealthy flora.
Okay.
And it feeds yeast, which is basically stuff that really compromises, it causes inflammation, and it compromises the integrity of our gut lining, and it basically ultimately blows holes in the gut lining.
Oh my God, I feel the pain.
If you think about, you might have heard of leaky gut syndrome, and sort of the idea of high, which is common for people with autoimmune diseases and common for people with allergies and sensitivities. If you think about sort of our body as kind of like a big inner tube, with sort of our digestive system is the sort of the inside of the tube, and our skin is the outside of the tube, but we are one continuous, connecting thing. And so in a way, it's like our gut is sort of, sort of the saying, as above, so below.
Yeah.
It's like our inside is comparable to our outside. And the gut is basically the same cellular material as our brain.
Okay.
And so there is a direct gut brain connection.
Okay.
And when we start basically compromising the integrity of the gut, we are basically compromising the integrity of our protective filters and shields.
Okay.
So it affects, and so sugar, because of the destabilizing nature, the way that it messes with our hormones, because insulin is our hormone,
right?
It, because it messes with our hormones, because it breaks, it basically busts holes in our gut,
right?
And I'm not talking about ulcers. I'm talking about microscopic, like weaknesses in the integrity of the gut lining. But because it destabilizes us, because it increases the overgrowth of yeast in our system, it causes a great deal of inflammation. It causes our bodies to just kind of cascade out. For the empath, who is almost always already very highly sensitive, this is kind of the bridge too far. And this is the thing that will often exacerbate an already vulnerable situation.
Oh, I have to throw out my cookies. I mean,
not necessarily. I mean, the other thing I will say is, as I said at the very beginning, the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the person who gives them. Take what you like, leave the rest. Your mileage may vary.
Yeah.
You may have better gut integrity than I do.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
The other thing is, I mean, for one thing, you live in Italy, and so you have access to better wheat. Like you're not eating GMOs the way we are here in the United States.
I understand. I was just there, and I know that the wheat is, I learned the hard way.
I mean, and so the thing is that it's because in my experience, it's also that there's the sort of this idea of the rain barrel effect, that it's like, sometimes it's like you can tolerate and tolerate and tolerate, and then there's that one extra drop, and then suddenly the barrel just bursts open. And sugar, sugar, like, I mean, just thinking about the way that we used to be able to eat it without that much
Right.
consequence,
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's none of these things are in a vacuum. None
Of
of these
course.
things are
Of course.
isolated.
They're
So it may
contextualized. Yeah.
be that because you are in an environment where there's less strain, but
Yeah.
also better
Sure.
quality
Sure.
food, that you may have less, like it may have less
Perhaps.
impact on you
Perhaps.
than it does on some
Yeah.
of us. But
But
if
mhm.
what I was just going to say is it
Uh-huh.
does, though, in my experience, sugar does tend to amplify
Yeah.
emotional distress.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is really having a hard time with feeling a lot of intense emotion,
Mm-hmm.
my advice is, when suggestion is, try putting down sugar for
Mm-hmm.
at least 21 days,
Oh my God.
I
Die,
ultimately
I
at least
will
a month,
die. The
and
pleasure
see
of
how you
chocolate.
feel. Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess what I would ask you is,
Yeah.
are you struggling with emotions that you can't
Oh,
control?
right,
Are you
right. Of course.
struggling with
Of course.
feeling
Yeah,
overwhelmed
yeah,
and
yeah.
not knowing why you're
Yeah, yeah,
feeling this
yeah.
way? Are you feeling despair
Yeah.
and fear and
Yeah.
anxiety all the time?
Mm-hmm.
Because these are the reasons why you give up sugar. Like,
Right.
you don't give it up just because you should. You
Right.
give it up because your life has become
Yeah. Yeah.
unmanageable,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of know it's the
It's it's
and it's
it's
sort of like, this is
it's the
kind of like
killer.
your
Right.
last resort. Yeah.
What I wanted to sort of orient you toward in self-care, because self-care for me would mean ritualized energy clearing,
Mm-hmm.
and all of those things. Let's leave aside sugar for now, but
Mm-hmm.
self-care for empaths, in your book, I mean, you talk about empathic mastery and you work with empaths. Is there are there other suggestions you have?
Oh, there are
Mhm.
so many suggestions.
Give us
And
a
so
few. Mhm.
what I'd like to say actually is, the rituals of self-care, that is, you have to be fairly, like, your nervous system needs to be regulated to be
Right.
able to engage in those kinds of behaviors.
Yeah.
And before we can get into habits of, like, like practices of prayer and
Right.
energy clearing
Right.
and self-care like that, I actually really think we first need to just triage it and find, like, get somebody some relief.
Uh-huh.
And so, the first steps are really about, where are you shooting yourself in the foot?
Uh-huh.
How are you engaging in things? Like, are you giving and giving and giving and
Okay. So
giving?
understand what we're doing first. Be aware. Mhm.
Understanding what we're doing, and boundaries,
Okay.
having boundaries
What is a
is,
boundary for you? Give me an
so
example.
for me, a boundary, so there's two kinds of
Hmm.
boundaries. Well, I mean, there's many kinds of
Of
boundaries,
course.
but there's two fundamental kinds of boundaries. There's energetic boundaries,
Yeah.
which is about not being so porous that absolutely everything is just coming in and I'm
Right.
taking it
Right.
on.
Right.
And then there's strategic and emotional boundaries, which are about, this is, that's your stuff, this
Yeah.
is my
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And so actually there's sort of three categories. There's like the energetic, there's the emotional, which is sort of like, it's 10 o'clock at night and I see that that a person who's a known drama queen is calling me.
Yeah.
I choose not to answer the
Answer.
phone.
Right. Right.
Instead of being like, oh my
Sure.
God, why are they calling me at 10 o'clock
Right.
at night?
Right.
I
Right.
better answer it.
Right.
It's like, I can trust that they've got a higher power in their life and I'm
Right.
not it,
Right.
and that they're going to be okay. And so the
Hmm.
emotional boundaries are about knowing what's ours, what's not
Right.
ours. And in many ways, really having a clear sense of, not my circus, not my monkeys.
Right.
Whereas, and strategic boundaries are things like, well, your boss asks you to stay late and
Hmm.
to work on a project and to do something completely unreasonable, and instead
Uh-huh.
of just being like, sure, I'll give up my kid's 13th birthday and their
Right.
soccer match,
Right.
to basically say, your poor planning does not constitute my emergency.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
this is not, we did not agree on this. This is not
Yeah.
going to
Yeah. Yeah.
happen.
Hmm.
And so boundaries, like I said, can be about energy. They can be about, and our filters and shields. They
Hmm.
can be about our emotional
Right.
sense of, like, of what we know we do not want to engage
Sure.
in,
Sure.
and can also be about the strategic or the logistics of our life,
Sure.
and like, what are these boundaries? Like, even a boundary, here in the United States, the boundaries of, do you go to a family
Sure.
gathering with
Sure. Sure.
people,
Sure. What
with
you do.
people,
Hmm.
what do you do? What do you
Hmm.
do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jennifer, time really flies when you're having a good time.
I know. I knew we would have all kinds of things to
create a
talk about.
boundary here.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so we have the name of your book. Once again, show us the picture and the title for those of you who have the benefit of.
This is the book, Empathic Mastery, and the subtitle is a 5-step system to go from emotional hot mess to thriving success.
All right.
And the cool thing is it's very easy to find it no matter what country you are in, because you can go to empathicmasterybook.com to grab a copy of it.
Okay. Yeah. And your website is empathicmastery.com. Okay. Yeah. That's all we need. And thank you so much.
Oh, you are so welcome, Claudia. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. I do hope our paths will cross again.
I hope so.
Stay well, Jennifer. Again, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Bye-bye.